In the fourth part of the climate action aggregation tool, we have the reporting results, where the main results are presented. I'm now in the impact results sheet, where the potential reduction of greenhouse gas emissions is presented. If you click on calculate, this will take a while. The actual impact is calculated and updated with all the settings that you've inserted before. I've already done that, so no need to click on it again. And the results are given in several ways. Perhaps the most important is the one up here, where the annual total greenhouse gas emissions are given under a CPS and under an NSA target realization are given when accounting for overlaps. So here the dark blue line is the reference scenario, what would happen if there were no non-state action at all. And the light blue line shows what happens when sub and non-state actors fully realize their targets. So there is significant impact. Then on the right, there is the impact shown for each year. So as you can see, the impact of sub and non-state action increases over time, which is also a good thing to know. Then we focus on sub and non-state actors specifically. So here the green line is what these sub and non-state actors that are part of your assessment would do if they would not have target realization. So they follow the CPS growth rate in this case. And down here we see what they do if they indeed reach their targets in the yellow line. Then we have splits of the emission reduction potentials. So we see that roughly 67% of the emission reductions are obtained through scope 1 emissions and also a rather big share from scope 2 emissions. And we see that here 95% of emission reductions come from GHG emission targets and 5% of electricity-related targets, etc. We can also see the sectoral divide of emission reductions. So 96% of the emission reductions come from sector cross-cutting targets, and then there's a small division up here from other sectors. And we see that the building sector decreases with 3.5%, the electricity and heating sector decreases with 0.6%, and the other sectors stay roughly the same but still have an impact on the total emissions. The sheet contains several drop-downs to focus on certain sectors or scenarios specifically. In this case, I've selected electricity and heating, where you can zoom in on the sub and state actions in that sector. As you can see with the dark red line, it stays rather constant under a reference scenario, and sub and non-state actions have a significant impact and almost goes to zero under target realization. And we also see the annual impact of the electricity and heating sector actions and how it is divided over different categories. Then, because we have chosen the third assessment objective in the assessment input, we see this fourth section of results, namely the non-state and subnational actions contribution to climate policies. So we've inserted our NDC scenario, in this case the dark purple line, and we can see to what extent sub and non-state action contributes to that scenario. So as we can see, the sub and non-state actions under target realization get exactly at the same level of the NDC in 2050, whereas the reference scenario stays far above it. And we can also see that here where the emission gap is still pretty large for the reference scenario, in this case the CPS, but that the NDC's emission gap with NSA target realization is, well, zero in the end. It is important to realize that we cannot calculate two reference scenarios, basically. The impact of the orange line is always based on the reference scenario, in this case, the CPS, like I've explained before. So to truly compare NSA target realization with the NDC scenario, you should insert the NDC scenario as a reference scenario, but please look up the national pathways for that. If you would have inserted more than one additional scenario, you could have chosen from the drop down here, but we only have one. Then also here you can zoom in on the sectors within this additional climate scenario. At the bottom of the sheet, all the results are presented in numbers, in values, and users can use these to pull the exact values that feed into the graphics above. Then in the second part of the results, we have the landscape analysis. As I have explained before, this is a kind of a quantitative analysis of your actions list. So it's more like statistics almost. So we have the potential impact given here in row 21. That's in the final assessment year. So in our case, 2050. Then it summarizes how many actions were actually inserted into the aggregation analysis. So in this case, 87. And the total emissions coverage of actions in the final assessment year. So in our case, 2050, 20% of the emissions were covered by actions if actions would follow a reference scenario. Here there are some figures that show all the numbers of the actions list. So how many actions are in the sector cross-cutting, 58 actions come from cities, etc. We can also analyze what the extent of targets are. So we have short-term targets, mid-term targets, long-term targets, and total number of actions within the assessment boundary for each sector. So as we can see in this case, all sector cross-cutting targets are long-term, but in the electricity and heating, we have quite some mid-term targets. Again, this information is all summarized in tables below. So here a little more detailed information can be found. And here a very detailed landscape is provided with number of actions in the assessment. It's important to realize that the landscape analysis also depends on the assessment boundary. So if you want to really analyze everything in your actions list, you should select all options in the assessment boundary. If you deselect certain options, for example, you did not include the agricultural sector as part of your assessment boundary, it won't show up in the landscape analysis. In the third part of the reporting results, we can develop a reporting sheet where you can develop a cover sheet for a report or summarize your main findings. You start with inserting your name. So in my case, my surname and the name of your organization. And the date of assessment. In my case, February 2021. I've not completed this assessment before. If you have, you can compare this assessment with previous findings. You insert the country or region that you've assessed, in my case, Fantasyland, for example, and the targeted audience are, in my case, policymakers. If you click on reporting update, which might take a while, it automatically fills some findings. So we'll do that. So after reporting update, the sheet is filled with important information. So the assessment objective was from the assessment boundary, and it means it was the contribution of non-state and subnational actions to climate targets as our third assessment objective. I can fill in further details if I want to elaborate on this objective. The country or region that I had assessed was, in my case, Fantasyland, and my intended audience was policymakers, which I have filled in before. Here our assessment boundaries are summarized. So it gives every sector and etc. that you've inserted as part of your assessment and the period of assessment and electricity emission factors. Can further describe your non-state and subnational actions here, and a list of all actions has been saved in the annex, which I will come back to later. Here, the scenarios used in the assessments are summarized, including our emission split, and a summary of the impact is provided, including the landscape. Down below, an overview of all your actions is provided, including all the information that is given. And as I have inserted agricultural down as a policy, it is also given here. If I click on Save File as an Excel file, this whole file is saved, you can export it to somewhere else. You can also save the sheet as a PDF without annex. So then this sheet is saved including row 130, but excluding everything below annex. If you save the sheet as a PDF with annex, the annex is of course included. In the final part of the tool, the appendix, a few remaining sheets are, like I've explained before, in the worksheet, users can perform separate calculations that are needed elsewhere, or for example, in my case, store an NDC scenario or any other emission scenario. In the sources, we provide useful sources that can be used to find more information about SIP and non-state actions. And in the admin sheet, we have saved every list that's been used throughout the tool. If users want to review what sectors are part of which subsectors, for example, they can refer to this sheet. So you can see that in energy, manufacturing, and industry, these sectors are included, and this can be useful to find the correct sector for your use. These lists cannot be adjusted by the user, they are locked cells. And that was the full walkthrough of the climate action aggregation tool. Thanks a lot for your attention, and please reach out if you have further questions or comments. Thanks a lot.